In this video, we are going to go over send and receive email, the different types of setups that you might be able to accomplish, and the pros and cons of each. And let's get right down to it. If you remember last time, we talked about the three types of email: send and receive email, which is basically, a person sends an email to a person, and that email needs to be hosted somewhere. And then the person can send another email to the other person in reply, and that email has to be hosted as well. It's one person to one person email, and that's really what defines it. Let's take a look down here and just go over a few concepts about send and receive email. Let's go over and define a few topics that you'll need to know about in order to manage email with best practices for your WordPress websites and using custom domain names. So if we think about domain names, a domain name itself is something.com, right? I'll use example.com in this video series. But as far as domain names go, basically they are like the Yellow Pages directory for the internet. When someone types in a memorable domain name like example.com, what happens is, if somebody goes to a web browser and in the address bar at the top here, they type in example.com, what happens is that browser goes over to the internet at large, and it tries to look up what numerical IP address is represented by that domain name. And this all happens in the background very quickly in a matter of milliseconds. But an IP address is a 4-digit number that looks something like this, 127.61.25.7 with dots in between each one. So once the browser retrieves that IP address, it takes the IP address, and that's basically the definition of a location on the internet of a website or a series of websites. And so that numerical number represents a location on the internet where the website lives. And so here's the other arrow. What happens is that browser then navigates to the website server where there might be one website or more than one website. If there's more than one website, each one of these at the same IP address has a different domain name associated with it. And so the hosting server for that WordPress website, picks the correct one. This one's example.com. And then it sends that website code to the person's browser, and yay, they can open the website and they're happy. Now let's contrast that with email. If we go to the next section here on my iPad drawing, suppose someone opens up their email program or a web-based email like Gmail or something like that, and they type in an email address. They first open a compose window or they send an email to an email address. Now an email address has a domain name within it, as you know. So they send an email address to a name at example.com. And because that formatting is an email address, what happens with the DNS or the domain name system on the internet at large is that the DNS system will recognize that as an email and not as just a regular website address like example.com. And when it recognizes it as an email, it goes and looks at the DNS records that are associated with that domain name, and it says, well, let's look at the mail exchanger records, and that's what MX stands for. So it looks at the MX records for the domain name, and it comes across an IP address associated with that MX record. And then it says, okay, that's the IP address associated with this domain name if it's an email address. And then it goes over here and it delivers the email to that person who's responsible for storing that email and hosting it. So over here, I've got a picture of a disk drive, and this right here represents email hosting. And so the more email, and attachments and things that you get, the more your email here is going to start filling up with stuff, right? Your email storage and your email hosting has to store that email somewhere. Now, you can set up your individual email address and your email program to delete emails after a certain period of time, or to delete them manually. As you put them in the deleted emails folder, you can remove them off of your storage server so that, it doesn't fill up. But let's talk about some of those concepts now. Now, as far as, hosting email and your website, let's just look and say that this top one right here is, that's your email and website, that's your website host. And in many cases, shared hosting or, basic website hosts include email. And that's great. For some people, just at the very beginning or for convenience, it is probably the easiest way to set up website hosting and email hosting for a domain name, just all at the same place. And there are pros and there are cons for that system as well. But one of the things I want to illustrate with this drawing is that you have, if you have your website, for example, and your website is taking up a certain amount of space, that's inside of your hosting storage space here, up to that amount. And then that website is now live and you're starting to receive emails, and those emails have to be stored somewhere, as I illustrated before. And you can maybe think about what I'm getting at here. I'm indicating that there could potentially be a problem in the future, especially as many people don't go in there and manage the storage of their emails, attachments, things that were sent, and people just keep old emails, seems like forever and ever. So one thing that can happen is if you let that email box fill all the way up to the top, and you have a quota on the email storage and the website and email hosting storage, when that fills up, well, that email, that server that hosts the email and the website can go down. Basically, it can, if you receive too many emails and fill up the email box, you can have the website go down. And so, it's especially problematic if you're on a, basic host, which most of these kinds of systems are, where that host has websites, not just a single website, but many, many, many websites sharing the resources of the storage space and the server resources. And so, this particular website right here, if there is, emails being sent to this particular website right over here, and this website and domain name is responsible for filling up all of this storage, then just because of this one website here, that can cause the entire server to go down. And what does that mean? That means that this website's down, this website's down, this website, this website, this website, this website. And this is not only true of a shared hosting, basic hosting that you might get at a inexpensive price, but it's true of a more robust virtual private server or VPS host that you might be using, where each of these sites is maybe one of your client sites. And so it's a best practice to have a website host and have an email host. Now, this website host, that hosts the domain name example.com. And separately, these two things are not connected. This is hosted at a different place. This one is, the emails for send and receive email. Your name at example.com. And so by keeping those two things separate, your website, the website can, can sit here and it can, take up however much space. And you always want to have kind of this extra space available in case you get, a lot of traffic and you have room to grow. And the same is true with email hosting. If you got send and receive email filling up, a certain amount of the space, what can happen is that, as you get more and more emails coming in the case that your email box fills up, what I'm saying is that the email may be affected by that filling up, but it's not going to affect the website at all. The website stays up, even if you fill up the email box. And so I'm going to show you guys some best practices as far as send and receive email. 4 different ways that you can set up send and receive email at your custom domain names and domain names for websites you own or client websites. So now that we've gone over those concepts, the concept of DNS, the domain name system, and how that translates IP addresses from domain names that humans can read and write and type, and then points the browser to the correct server, you'll understand more about how I go over these concepts here. So some setups for send and receive email. First, the simplest solution is to go to a website host, something simple. I do recommend SiteGround as a way to start for an inexpensive price for a shared website host, as well as Create.com is offering 1 year free of hosting without a payment method attached to it. And you can get that deal if you use the promo code DAVIS, DAVIS, to get that 1 year free at Create.com. And I'll show you an example of how I use that. But if you register your domain at your website host itself, that's probably the simplest way to go, and it's the way a lot of people start out. You go to a website host like SiteGround, and they offer to either give you a domain name for free for the first year, or free for the lifetime of your account, or a heavy discount. And by doing that, they're kind of holding you into their hosting system, registering your domain, and giving you website and email hosting all at the same place for one price. And one of the pros there is that is easy. It's already set up. Email is included, and the DNS records and the name servers, which is a way to point DNS records from one place to another, those things are already set up for the domain that you tell your website host about. However, there are a few cons there, and you might imagine, since we've gone over a few of these concepts already, that some of the cons, you're locked into the host. When your domain is attached to that hosting account, if you want to migrate your site to a more powerful host or a different service, you're also going to have to transfer ownership of the domain name. And that can kind of be a pain, take a little bit of time. Oftentimes, domain names can be locked for 60 days after a change has been made, and in that way, they're not allowed to be transferred except for that 60-day period being expired. And so sometimes you can run into delays like that. And so that is one of the cons of having just an all-inclusive hosting and email service. And then the problem that I illustrated above. The email is hosted on the same server as the website. And that just poses that risk that if the email boxes were to fill up, you could steal the resources from the website, and then the website could go down. So it's best practice to keep those two things separate. Now, a better way to go, still very, very simple, is that you've got your website, hosted at a particular website host, possibly an inexpensive shared website host, and it still includes email, which it can be very convenient. It's one of the pros. It's easy to set up, and it's also easy to migrate. In this case, though, the difference is that you have registered the domain name at an accredited registrar, a different company whose sole purpose is to register domain names and then point them wherever you want them to be pointed. For example, to your website host. And so, as an example, I host most of my clients' domain names and my domain names at GoDaddy.com. I wouldn't use GoDaddy for hosting, but they're a great domain registrar, and they're easy to manage. They even have a domain club where you can get domains at a discount. Namecheap is also a very reputable domain registrar that you can use. But by using a separate domain registrar from the hosting, one of the pros is that it's easier to migrate. So suppose your domain name, example.com, is registered at Namecheap or GoDaddy. It's registered somewhere. What you do is you use something called name servers to point the domain name from the registrar over to the website. And by doing that basically means that you can easily migrate the site to different hosts, and you don't have to change ownership of the domain name. And the second thing is that it's easy setup. It's easy to set up the website and point the domain with name servers. Quite easy. But there are a couple of cons. You might imagine the email, again, is hosted alongside the website, and it's sharing resources. And so this con right here, this problem where email shares resources with the website, is why companies that do managed WordPress hosting like Flywheel and WP Engine, companies like Kinsta, those companies do not even offer email hosting. They host WordPress websites only, and they do it very, very well, but they don't offer email hosting. And so what do you do in that case? Well, there's some different price points, but what you want to do, and I'll go to the even better best practice in hosting email for WordPress websites at custom domains, and that is to get a separate email host. Now, there's a few different ones I'll go over, and we'll look at the pricing of those too. But just to go over this diagram here, if you look at, in example.com, again, is our domain name. Again, it's registered with an accredited registrar. However, the DNS records, instead of all pointing to the website host where there would be email and website together, instead, you customize the DNS records and you use a particular kind of record. There's an A record, and that is a website DNS record. A DNS record is basically an instructions for the browser to let the browser know where to go get the information it needs, whether it's a website or whether it's email or even something else. But an A record is designed so that when you define the A record with an IP address, then that example.com, if somebody types that into a browser, that's going to go and open the website. And the difference is over here, I'll do this in blue since this is for send and receive email, an MX record or mail exchanger record. So when you define a different record as an MX type of record instead of an A record, then when the person wants to send an email out to an address like your name at example.com, then what happens is that goes straight to the email hosting here, and it does not conflict with the website ever. These two are not connected. And so the pros of that are probably pretty obvious. You've got separate resource usage between the two things. The website has its resources on the server that always have their limits, and the email is hosted in a totally different place, a different IP address, and it does not and cannot conflict with the website hosting itself. And so that's a big pro, There's also one more thing that I might point out as far as, another pro. The email is using a different IP address from the website. And that brings up something that's an important concept in email deliverability here. It's a little bit of what we're talking about, and what I'll go into deeper in subsequent videos in this series is email reputation. And so by using a different IP address for the email than we are using for the website, if there's any issue with emails being either falsely or truly assigned, spam score that's higher than normal, if somebody reports an email that you've sent as spam or something like that, that cannot affect the IP address reputation of the website. Again, keeping things separate is a best practice. There's only really one con that I can think of, and that's it just takes a little bit more setup. And so when you keep those things separate, that is the best practice. And so as we come down a little bit here lower, there's one more best practice, and that's to add a separate service called a DNS service. And this is basically hosting your DNS records in a separate place from your domain registrar. So, like we had before, you have a domain registrar. Like I said, I use GoDaddy, and there's also Namecheap. But what you do is you point your domain using name servers, like we did before. You don't point them direct to the website or to email. You point the name servers right to a DNS service. And then that DNS service uses, remember what I said before, it uses A records and MX records to point the traffic, whether it's website traffic to the website or email traffic, to send the email to the email host instead of the website. And some of the benefits of using a DNS service, one that you might be familiar with is called Cloudflare. There's also DNS Made Easy. One of the things that I would really recommend is to use the Cloudflare free service. There is a lot that is offered within the Cloudflare free service, and so some of those things that that you can get by using a DNS service is, the DNS records are there and accessible to you, but when you make any changes to the DNS records, anything on your domain where it's pointed, it happens fast. Basically, there's with Cloudflare at least, and with the fast DNS providers, it's instant, and there's no you can create websites and move websites with no downtime, because you can point traffic in an instant without any propagation of that DNS record across the internet, having to wait oftentimes 24 to 48 hours when you make a DNS change at your domain registrar. But if you use a professional service like a DNS service like Cloudflare, that happens instantly instead. And so that's one of the biggest benefits. Another big benefit of using a DNS service like Cloudflare or DNS Made Easy is that that's one of the first bottlenecks, the DNS lookup. That's one of the first bottlenecks that prevents websites from opening super fast on the user's browser. So Cloudflare is known as one of, if not the fastest, in TTFB it's called, and that stands for time to first byte. And so, TTFB, the time to the first byte, B-Y-T-E, being opened in the person's browser is in a matter of, milliseconds when you use a DNS service like Cloudflare or DNS Made Easy. And so a couple of the other benefits, there's other things that the DNS service like Cloudflare will give you, a content delivery network, so that all of your websites can open from different parts of the world, and all of your media can be loaded much faster for the end user, whether they're across the world on one side of the earth or on the other side of the earth. A CDN places copies of your website in different data centers around the world. And the DDoS protection and a firewall, that's basically for hacking attempts or denial of service attempts, where you're getting a lot of traffic, robot traffic to your login page or something like that. DNS service can prevent that. And like I said, a fast time to first byte. And so that's kind of the range of what you can do as far as send and receive email and what are the best practices. Now let's finish the video by going over some of the exact tools that I use for setting up systems like this, and I'll show you their differences and how they work, and let you go from there. So as an example, I indicated that I really highly recommend SiteGround for hosting on the inexpensive side, and for people who are just starting out. You can still host multiple websites, but you're often looking at shared hosting as a starting point. That's the cheapest. I'll also show you around my create.com WordPress hosting area. And I'm just going to use this one as an example because it uses something called cPanel, which stands for Control Panel, which a lot of basic hosts use. And so if we look at my create.com account, I've got just kind of a sample domain here called humanhandwriting.com. If I click Manage under that, my create.com website hosting account gives me a control panel here and some different options. And if I look at the cPanel tools, that will open some of the mainly used or most often used tools within the cPanel, and then I'll show you what the cPanel looks like. But oftentimes on the overview or dashboard screen for any of your websites at your hosting company, you'll see what name servers are being used. And they will tell you these name servers. It's usually a subdomain like ns1.something.com and ns2.something.com. And if I go over to my GoDaddy account and I go into this domain name right here where it's hosted, I can go to and click Manage DNS. And I'll just show you how this is set up within my GoDaddy account for this domain. One thing I want to point out is that since I'm using name servers, I'm basically pointing all traffic that comes to this humanhandwriting.com domain name to the two name servers that were given to me by my website host. That means all traffic. That means website traffic and email traffic. And so the DNS records that I talked about before, the A record and the MX records, etc., are hosted at the website host itself at create.com in this case. And so GoDaddy tells me up here that we can't display the DNS information because the name servers aren't managed by us. By default, if you set up a website at GoDaddy, they will have name servers that point to their own server, and then they do have a DNS management interface that you can use. But if I go back to my create.com account, I can look at the cPanel tools screen, and you can just see how easy it is. If I go to mail accounts, that opens another tab, and this is the cPanel interface. And some cPanel interfaces look different than others. There's different themes that you can use. But you can see that I've created an email address here, Greg at the domain name. And then I can do some things. I can check email on a webmail interface, and I can manage that email here. By clicking that, I can see things like how much email is stored and how much storage space I have allocated here, and I can change that if I want to. Now, if I go back to this little grid right here, this is the cPanel home screen, and you can see that email accounts is just where I was. There's a lot of different things that you can manage using cPanel at your website and email host. Now, of course, this system here has that problem where email is hosted at the same server as the website. And so that's something I might avoid, although you can see that this is very easy. Because I pointed the name servers to my create.com account, if I go down here and look for DNS, it's under domains in the cPanel, and I can click the zone editor. This is the DNS zone editor. And in that way, I can click manage here under the domain name, and then you can just check out what DNS records are there. There's 2 A records, and they're pointed to IP addresses at my web host. You can see that they're using a certain IP address for the mail subdomain. That's for the webmail system and being able to check email. But down here, you can see that there is an MX record, a mail exchanger record. And that destination is mail.humanhandwriting.com. So you can see that there are, A records and there's DNS records here that have been provided for me by the web host. And that's why a system like this, where you've got everything managed in one place, is fairly easy. I would still always recommend hosting or registering your domain at a separate provider from your website host. If you just do that, that's a start. But if you're wanting to move towards better best practices in your email hosting for WordPress, you're using potentially a managed host like Flywheel Hosting, WP Engine or Kinsta, or many others, even GridPane, like I use to host my sites and client sites. It's probably one of the most robust virtual private server hosting management companies that are out there. But again, none of these companies provide email hosting. And so what are you to do? Let me just show you a couple options. There's 2 paid options and a free option that I'm going to share with you here. I've used all 3 of them. It depends what the goals are for the website and the website owner. If you're hosting and setting it up for a client site, there may be a reason for you to use a free service versus a paid service. You get benefits with the paid services, and they're generally inexpensive. For most of my client sites, I provide them the email hosting as a part of my website hosting and website care and maintenance program. And I'll show you what you might pay for each of the email addresses and hosting. So I use Rackspace. Rackspace has been around a long time. They're a great website host and a great email host. They have a lot of different programs. But here at Rackspace.com, if I click Solutions, and under Applications, if you click Email and Productivity, that's where you might get to read about the email systems down here. And so as far as what I use, it's called Rackspace Email. And I can click this right here, learn more about Rackspace Email for the details. But if I just click Pricing, choose your plan. What I use is this $2.99 a month per email, and what it comes with is 25 gigabytes of space, which is huge, and they're using their own IP address. It's separate from my website and from the domain's website, and they're doing custom domain email services. There's also a lot of other good benefits like unlimited aliases, so you can have different email addresses that just automatically forward to the main email address. I use that quite a lot for myself. And there's even extra services you can apply, you can use. I do have one client that likes to keep all emails forever, and they use a lot of attachments, being an engineering firm that emails drawings a lot back and forth. And so they have archiving where they've got a lot more storage for older emails. But generally I use the $2.99 a month per email account. The next one I'll show you is Google. Now this used to be called Google for Business, and then it was G Suite for quite a long time. In October 2020, they changed and rebranded it Google Workspace, and kind of basically every plan within Google Workspace used to be G Suite. Includes all of these connected services that you might be familiar with. The Google Drive, Gmail, of course, and the calendar, Docs, Google Sheets, etc. But the price is $6 a month per email address or per user. And so it comes with a whole lot of benefits and 30 gigabytes of storage for each email address. And again, like I said, that's for setting up business email at a custom domain name so that you can be, your name at example.com or whatever your business name is. And I set that up for clients quite a bit. Now there is a free option at a company called Zoho. Now there is a forever free plan. I'll show you how to get here. If you go to Zoho.com, it's a little bit convoluted to get into the email, because Zoho offers a lot of different services, and it's a great company. But if you just click mail over here or under products, you could find it too. If you click mail, and then I'll just click pricing, and it shoots down to here. They do have paid email services with a little bit lower storage and lower pricing, and billed annually. And I haven't used their paid services, but I have often set up the free service. There's a free forever plan that gives 5 gigabytes for each email address, each user, and it is quite a large attachment limit, so you can send large email attachments. The one limitation it has is noted down here, that it doesn't have IMAP or POP3 email, meaning that you can't use an email client like Outlook or Thunderbird or an email program like MacMail on an Apple computer in order to check email. The only way to check the email and send and receive emails is through the web in a browser. And it's easy to use and looks good. It's just one limitation that they have now on the forever free plan. But it does allow you to offer send and receive email with storage for that email at a custom domain name for free. And so I've set that up for clients quite often. So the last thing I'll talk about is my email setup at gregdavis.com. I'm here in my Cloudflare account, and if you'll remember, that's a DNS provider, domain name system provider, the fastest time to first byte of any provider, really, or at least in the top 3. And if I've clicked the DNS tab for gregdavis.com, and I'll tell you that inside of my GoDaddy account where I have gregdavis.com registered, I've just used name servers to point all the traffic at gregdavis.com straight to Cloudflare. And so now that traffic comes to Cloudflare, I can manage the DNS for this custom domain name. And I just wanted to show you that going down here, there's a lot of records that I'll talk about in the subsequent 2 videos in this Email for WordPress series. But I just wanted to show you that as I go down here, it's the MX records, or the mail exchanger records, that are important. And because I was given these MX records by my Rackspace account. And so in my Rackspace Office account, it tells me, okay, use these MX records. If you were using Google Workspace, Google tells you a number of MX records that you need to add to your domain's DNS. And Zoho would do the same thing. But here in Cloudflare, you can see that my MX records are pointed to a domain called emailserver.com. Those are Rackspace's name servers for the email MX records. And so you could see that while my A record here at gregdavis.com, the website traffic is going to this IP address. That's where my website is hosted. The mail that comes in, anybody that sends an email to an email address that I've set up at Rackspace at gregdavis.com, it goes to the Rackspace. So for every email address I have at gregdavis.com, I have 25 gigs of space, and I really never fill that up. And it's a different IP address from here. So that helps you manage your email reputation. And it also allows you to use a program like Outlook called an email client. I use Mozilla Thunderbird, but I can use any email program that I like for IMAP or POP3 email. Those are 2 types of send and receive email. And that's beyond the scope of this video, but that is the most robust setup that you can get. So just to review, I have the domain name hosted at GoDaddy. I'm using name servers to point that domain name to my DNS provider, which is Cloudflare. Okay. And then in the DNS settings, I point my website with an A record, and I point my email with these 2 MX records. And some of these other records are, you can see Google Site Verification. Some of these are authentications that I've made in the past so that I can host my email and verify it for Rackspace to be able to use and send and receive my email. And we'll talk about verifications when we talk in the next two videos about transactional email as well as marketing or bulk email. Well, thanks for being here, guys. I really appreciate you. This has been a much longer video than I thought it would be, but I thought that everything we covered was very important to cover for send and receive email, and I really hope that that gives you a basic understanding and a foundational understanding of send and receive email and how it works with custom domain names. See you in the next lesson.